Hi, in this video I'll be covering CFA Level 1 Quantitative Methods, in particular to time value of money. So we'll look at a few examples of future value of single cash flows. In example 1, we have Brian who invests $1,000 today into an interest-bearing account, and it earns on average 7% per annum, okay, for 9 years. So calculate the future value of his investment at the end of 9 years. So in other words, today Brian would invest $1,000. Okay, so we want to find out how much Brian will have at the end of 9 years if his balance grows at a rate of 7% per year on a compounded basis. So we'll look for this future value here. Now, if you're using the formula, so the future value will be based on the present value multiplied by 1 plus the interest rate per period to the power of n, which is the number of periods that we invest in. So if we take the PV, the present value will be $1,000 today. Okay, and then multiply by 1 plus 7% to the power of 9. So that will be equals to... Now, if this is your first time using the calculator, you have to go through a few setups. So we'll press second decimal place to enter the format function. So, of course, initially the decimal place will be 2. You can set it to 4 or 5 or 6. I would go for 9. Okay, it doesn't mean there's 9 decimal places. In fact, it is more flexible because it will show as many decimal places as they are in the answer. Okay, subject to the limitation of the screen here. So I'll press enter there. Now scroll up, make sure you're using AOS instead of CHN. Okay, because we tend to stick to the AOS, which is the algebraic operating system. Okay, so press second enter to change the mode. Make sure it's AOS. Then you press CEC to get out. Okay, so in this case we'll compute this. So I'll enter 1000. Okay, 1000 multiplied by 1.07 to the power of 9. That's equals to $1,838. Okay, so that's $1,838. Okay, so that's using the calculator manually. Of course, the calculator has a time value of money function. Let's look at that. So for the time value of money function, it will be on the third row. Okay, you will see these 5 buttons here: N, IY, PV, PMT, and FV. So as a good practice before you start your computation, always clear the inputs in these 5 buttons. So we'll press second FV, which is to invoke clear the time value of money worksheet. So this resets everything on these 5 buttons to 0. Okay, now let's start. So there is no sequence to the way of how you enter the numbers. You can enter in any sequence. Okay, so usually out of these 5 inputs, there will be 1 output that you want to get. And in this case, we want to get the future value. That's our output. So I will need to find out what is FV. So in this case, I have to key in N, IY, PV, and PMT. Alright, so for N, the number of periods we are investing for 9 years. So that's 9 as N. Okay, just press 9 and N to save it in. And then for the interest rate, it's 7%, so we'll enter it as 7 and IY. Okay, this is in percentage. And then PV, okay, this will be your initial investment or your present value. That's 1000. So you can press PV. Then I'll talk a bit about the signage later. Then we have the PMT. Okay, PMT, it means that during these 9 years, is there any interim cash flows in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you're not going to put any extra money from between 0 to 9 years. So we'll keep that as 0, PMT. Of course, PMT was 0 in the first place when we reset, but I'll just make it consistent. So I'll put 0 as PMT, which means that from year 1 to year 9, okay, there were no additional cash flows. Okay, it's all 0. You didn't invest further. So once we have that, so we'll now compute the future value. So we'll press CPT, compute, and FV. So that gives us the same number, which is $1,838.46. Okay, now what you will note here is that it shows FV as a negative number. And the reason why the calculator does that is because we entered PV as a positive number. If you recall earlier, I'll press recall PV. We entered it as 1000. So the calculator will always give an opposite signage, okay, for FV. So if I key in this as positive 1000, my future value will be negative. If I key in, let's say I key in this as negative 1000, let's say 1000 with a negative sign, and then PV, and then I'll compute FV again, I'll get 1838. Okay, so it's a positive number now. So of course, if you are being very particular, okay, then of course when you invest, usually we treat it as a cash outflow. So your PV should be negative and your FV will be positive when you receive the money 9 years later. Okay, but of course, if you're not too particular, then in this case, when I enter 1000 as PV and I compute FV, just take the absolute figure. So that's how we get the future value. This is assuming a compounding interest, okay, and we are assuming that the interest is compounded annually. Okay, so this is an important assumption here. That means interest is only calculated once a year. Now after this, we're going to look at different scenarios. Now let's say for example 2, now we have Brian again who invests 1000 1 year from today, okay, into an interest-bearing account that earns on average 7% per annum for 8 years. So our Brian will only start to invest this $1,000 1 year from now, and he will invest it for 8 years. For 8 years. And in other words, it will end at year 9. So calculate the future value of his investment at the end of 9 years. Now it's always good to draw the timeline of the cash flow to have a good understanding of how long the investment is for. And in this case, the investment is not for 9 years, it's only for 8 years. So again, we want to find out what is the future value of his investment at the end of 9 years. So the future value, again, based on the formula earlier, is PV times 1 plus R to the power of n. So this will be $1,000 multiplied by 1.07 to the power of 8 instead of 9. Okay, since he's only investing for 8 years. So using the calculator, okay, we can then perform the same operation. So we'll press 1000 times 1.07 to the power of 8. So that's equals to 1718. Now, I'll use the time value of money worksheet to compute the same number as a practice. So remember, press second FV to clear the calculator, time value of money inputs, and then we'll key in. So your PV will be 1000, okay, and then your N is 8 years, not 9 years, and IY is 7%, and then PMT is 0, as there is no interim cash flows between 1 to 9 years, and then we'll compute FV. So that's $1,718. So that's simple. Now let's look at the last example. Now let's say Brian invests $1,000 today into an interest-bearing account that earns on average 7% per annum, but is compounded quarterly, which means interest is calculated every 3 months, and this is for a whole period of 9 years. So calculate the future value of his investment at the end of 9 years. So since interest is compounded quarterly, now we have to recompute. We have to find out what's the interest rate per period. So that will be 7% divided by 4 quarters. So that will be 7 divided by 4. So that's 1.75% per quarter. Okay, and for how many quarters would this be? So since we are Brian will be investing for 9 years, so 9 years multiplied by 4 quarters, so that will be a total of 36 quarters. So when you compute this, okay, again it's for a 9 years period, but interest is calculated every quarter. So if I just illustrate a timeline in the space of 1 year, so between let's say 0 to 1 year, so we have quarter 1, okay, I'll show it as in terms of fractions, so that's 0.25 for first quarter, second quarter, and third quarter. So when Brian invests $1,000 here, it will be invested, okay, so up to first quarter, they'll calculate the interest, and then it will be compounded to the next quarter, and the third quarter, and for the last quarter, and then they'll be for 1 year. Now imagine that this will continue on for the whole 36 quarters. So the future value using the same formula will take PV times 1 plus R to the power of n. So that will be $1,000 times 1 plus 0.0175. That's 1.75% to the power of 36. So how much would that be equals to? Okay, so this will be $1,000 times 1.0175 to the power of 36. So that's 1,867. So that's how much Brian will have in his account, okay, at the end of that 9 years. And you will notice that this is higher compared to the initial result that we got in example 1. Okay, and this is due to the compounding power. So previously we only have 1,838, but now we have $1,867. Now, how do I do this using the calculator? It's the same way. I'll press second F3 to clear the time value of money worksheet. Okay, 1,000 then will be PV. Again, there's no order of the or sequence to enter the numbers here. Now the N will be 36 instead of 9 years. It's 36 quarters. Interest rate is 1.75%. Okay, and then PMT is 0 since we don't have any interim cash flows. And then we'll compute future value. So that's what we get, $1,867.